Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and author of the newly released #1 best-selling Messianic book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. Get yourself a copy of it. This morning we're visiting with Andreas Knapp, author of a book called The Last Christians, Stories of Persecution, Flight, and Resilience in the Middle East. Andreas Knapp, Father Knapp, welcome to our program.
Hello, good evening. Hello.
You come to us live from Leipzig, Germany. He's a poet, priest, and popular author in what was once East Germany. He left a secure position as the head of the Freiburg Seminary and a promising future as a well-respected theologian to live and work among the poor as a member of the Little Brothers of the Gospel, a monastic religious order inspired by Charles de Foucauld. Today he shares an apartment with 3 brothers in Leipzig's largest housing project and ministers to prisoners and the refugees who now occupy the city in the former East Germany. His latest book recounts the stories of refugees in his neighborhood and of displaced people in camps in Kurdistan, northern Iraq. May I call you Father Knapp?
Yes.
I give great deference to a Catholic priest. You have been called to a life devoted to service to God within the Catholic Church, and really kind of break the framework a little bit, because it's usually you go where we send you, you do where we say, you know, we have an order of things, and this is the order. And for a period of time in your life, and I'd like you to share the early years of what called you into the priesthood and what some of your assignments were. But when then in that career did the light switch go off and you made a turn?
I was just touched by the message of Charles de Foucauld when I was a student. During my time of studying theology, I discovered this message because for him it was very important to follow Jesus of Nazareth. And Nazareth, that was for him also a place. This is a place outside of the big cities, a small village, living near to the poor people, nearby to people who have not a good reputance, who are not honored by the society. And so Charles de Foucauld discovered, I want to live nearby to Jesus, who lived in Nazareth with a very simple people, with the everyday life of work and of family and of neighborhood. And when I was a priest, so I was happy about my working with people in the parish and the pastoral work. But at the same time, I missed a little bit to be nearer to the little people, to the poor, to the people outside of the society. And so I followed my heart, and I asked my bishop to give me this opportunity to enter to the religious congregation of the Little Brothers of the Gospel. And since I am there, I'm very happy about this style of life, which is very simple, but which is very near to the neighbors. And I'm living here in a quarter of Leipzig where there are a lot of people. They have social problems. They are a little bit outside of the society. There are people which are disoccupied. They are alcoholic, with alcoholic problems. And so these are my new neighbors, and I can deal with them. I know them. We visit them. They come to our flat. And since 3 years ago, we have also the refugees who arrived in Germany. And in our quarter, there are a lot of empty flats, just because it's not a quarter of a good reputance. It's a quarter which the citizens of Leipzig don't like. It's a little bit outside. It has no good reputation. And so there are a lot of empty flats. And the refugees now arrived here, and they found here a new place to live. And so they are my new neighbors, and I came in contact with them.
You know, it's interesting that you had this position as the director of the Freiburg Seminary. This means
Yes.
that you started out as a what is it, as a novitiate, working your way all the way up to being an ordained priest. Then in was this a Franciscan order? Was this a Franciscan order using the Franciscan message of teaching, wonderful method of teaching. We're going to tell you what we're going to teach you. We teach it to you, and then we tell you what we told you. We'll tell you what we taught you. This is kind of in use, kind of a standard system. Most people don't know that that's Franciscan. So you go from this and you go to your bishop and you tell your bishop, I've obtained something that others aspire. And let's be honest, priests are human beings. They have aspirations. I'm a minister, I'm devoted to the Lord, but I have thoughts of higher things, of other things. To say that the mind becomes glued, super glued to the mind of Christ and can't move on its own is a fallacy. But yet you were touched in your heart by the little brothers of Jesus because of their closeness to life. And so you stepped out of the headmaster office and jumped into the pool.
Yes, that was not so easy because, as you say, all priests are also very human beings, and so I have also other needs. And one important need of every human being is to have a certain honor, to be somebody in the society, to be recognized. And it was for me very hard to change from being director of the seminary, and the next step was I worked as a cleaner in Paris, as a very simple cleaner and this was a big difference. And for me it was like a detoxination. Is this a good word?
Yes.
Yes, because I was used to be very honored and all people tell, oh, Mr. Director, how are you? But if you are a cleaner, nobody's interested in you. You are not an interesting person, but you are nobody. And so that was very hard for me to live this time. Now, who I am. And I had to rediscover my spiritual sources, my spiritual roots. And that was for me, can I really believe that it's enough for me to being known by God, that God sees me, that God gives me my reputation, that my name is written in the hand of God and not to the diploma or the doctorate paper and all the documents, but it's written in the hand of God. And so I had to rediscover that and to deepen that. And the second thing which helped me was the community, because we as the little brothers, we are not living alone like I did it as a director. And I was also often lonesome, because in a high position, you are alone. You don't have, it's difficult to have real friends because other people want to profit of the relationship with you. And so I could rediscover a real community, real brothers, which were very honest to me, which were true to me, which helped me to begin this other kind of life. And I was accepted as a member of this community. And this helped me to look for the distance of my former life and to discover other values and other spiritual roots.
You came face to face with yourself
Yes.
to find how God wanted you to be a reflection of himself.
Yes.
It really is a journey that we're all called to make, but sometimes the path is so easy, we don't take it. So real transformation comes on one encounter, first with ourselves, as Paul had to do as he was imprisoned. He had to come face to face with his own shortcomings. He clearly said that what I ought to do, I don't, and what I should do, I don't do. I do what I shouldn't do, and I don't do what I should. That kind of describes everybody, and Paul was everybody. But during this time, you were then, did you relocate from France on your own? Did you transfer? How did you make it to Leipzig?
Yes, this experience, I could deepen it in Naples. So I lived in Naples and I was working in the construction. And the next step, my community proposed to go to Bolivia in South America. And there I lived really in a very poor population. And I worked there as a farmer with the others, with the cows, and then we produced the yogurt, and I sold the yogurt on the market of Cochabamba as walking with a box with the yogurt through the streets as a seller of things. And there I had a lot of contact of children and young people which were living on the road, which were on the street, which had no home, homeless young people. And working with them, that was a very beautiful time, because you are very near to the real human problems, but also to the real human joy of everyday life. I could discover the real values. And the poor people, they were my teachers. They helped me to rediscover that the real values are not the economical values, but there are spiritual and the human values like friendship and trust and sharing what you have. And if you have only very small things, but if you share them, there is arising a joy and a community. So I learned that. That was a very important step for me.
When we look at seminary, when we look at being raised up, whether or not it's as a Baptist minister, as a rabbi, as a priest, we're taught canonical things, we're taught ecumenical things, but the Bible describes a way of life which is much different than us being the leaders over liturgical leaders in serving communion, taking confession, doing the things of the ritual. Now we set that aside and we move to like the upper room of Acts chapter 2, and we realize they didn't put a steeple on the upper room and create a church. They had a move of the Spirit and they went out, and then they had fellowship and they had friendship and they broke bread together and they wound up having a community. We don't show that or teach that in seminary across the board because that requires human interaction, and the design of seminary is to separate you, is to connect you via the word to the congregation, but it's shepherd training, not sheep training. Okay? So all of a sudden now a shepherd is supposed to smell like sheep. He's not supposed to be so far removed. But when we look at the life we both have led, where we were apart from the sheep, we didn't smell like sheep. We smelled like nice clean soap, and they were smelly sheep. Now we're close to the people and we smell like sheep. It's a different experience.
Yes, and just was this the experience of Jesus, because we believe that God wanted to smell like human being. It's the incarnation. God became a human being for to smell like a human being and to know everyday life of human and to share it until to be killed. So all the difficulties of human life he shared with us in the life of Jesus. And so following Jesus, we have to look for the imitation a little bit of this way of God. It's the wisdom of God, and it's the expression of his love to smell like the loved people. It's the expression of love. I want to be near to the beloved person, and I want to share his life. I want not to live in another level, not to live in a very high social level if my beloved person is a poor one who is living in the streets. So I share his life, and then I will smell like somebody who is living in the street.
You wrote your book called The Last Christian, Stories of Persecution, Flight, and Resilience in the Middle East. You're in Germany, which is in the news every day. Angela Merkel opening up the borders, millions of Islamic and Christian refugees coming from the Middle East, the insurgence of new communities, Islamic centers, but yet stories of persecution coming out of communities which have been overrun by terrorist organizations. And in your book, you talk about some of the people that you met, some of the stories that you've interacted, and the underlying message is that there's persecution throughout the world. You're in the midst of persecution because you're in a nation which is trying to absorb and meld, in some cases, conflicting societies and different values. And there becomes an inter and intra persecution even within your own community. Maybe you can share some of that with us as to what's going on right there in Leipzig with you and the community there.
Yes, there were arriving 3 years ago a lot of refugees. They were coming from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and also from Northern Africa. And it's clear that this is not an easy situation because they are coming from countries in which there are conflicts, there are wars. So they are bringing with them also a certain aggressivity, or they were hurt, or they had to live difficult situations, and they brought all their difficult human experiences with them. And so it's not so, they are not coming like a tourist who is coming very well, but they were coming as very hurt persons. And it's not so easy to accept them because there are also a lot of tensions among them. And they are coming from very difficult cultures and traditions. But I saw that in Germany and also in Leipzig, they were, by the most people, they welcomed them. There was an atmosphere of welcoming them. And we opened our frontiers, our borders, and also our hearts and houses for them. But there are also other political opinions in Germany. Some people are afraid that there are too many strangers now in Germany, or there are too many Islamic people now in Germany. And they don't know them, but they are afraid of them. You're always afraid of something which you don't know. And the people who are very critical against these refugees, the most of them, they never had a personal contact with somebody. So I see this just in our quarter here. People who have personal contact with the refugees, they are very open. They see this is a treasure for us to welcome them. But other people who are afraid of being, that there are coming people which will threaten our traditions and our German nation, they never had a real human contact with them. So there are tensions in the German population and also between the certain refugee nations and traditions. But I am convinced that we will win if we are open and if we speak to them, we welcome them, we offer really the possibility that they find a new place here, that they find a place to live here in Germany. And I see that the most part of them are very interested to learn German in a short time. They learn, the children, but also the adult people learn very well German. A lot of them just found work. They are interested in our society and in our values. And so I see, I'm optimist. But it's true, we have also to face that there are problems. It's not a situation which can be, which we can live without difficulties or without forcing ourselves to give our best, of our values, of our economical, but also of our human and spiritual values. And a lot of them are very interested to know what is democracy, what are what is human rights or religious freedom, because they don't know from their home countries. It's new for them. And we have to help them to discover our values. A value you cannot give to people only by teaching, but it's something which you have learned by the actual conduct, by the behavior. And if you are respecting people, they learn respect. But there are also people who have no respect from them, who speak to them with hate or with distrust. So they will not learn respect. And just in prison, I have to work with a lot of prisoners which are just coming from other countries. And so it's not easy to help them to discover our behavior, our conduct, how we live together and how we respect each other, because they are used other traditions. Often they have suffered of a lot of violence, and people who suffered of violence, they are coming with a violent soul. So we have to help to transform their souls and their values and to learn other ways of conduct and of living together.
We're talking with Andreas Knapp, author of The Last Christian, Stories of Persecution, Flight, and Resilience in the Middle East. A first-hand look at what's going on in former East Germany with the plight of the refugees coming out of Syria, Iraq, and other nations where there has been persecution both for Muslims and for Christians. We are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into some of the repercussions of the Christian persecution that has taken place in the Middle East, how that translates into a spreading through Europe as the Islamization of Europe is taking place. We're seeing numbers from a sociological perspective increase, percentages of populations changing, neighborhood dynamics radically changing, how that's impacted, and is that going to be something that's going to come our way? We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll continue with Andreas Knapp and talk about The Last Christians, Stories of Persecution, Flight, and resilience in the Middle East. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're speaking with Andreas Knapp, Father Andreas Knapp, author of The Last Christian, Stories of Persecution, Flight, and Resilience in the Middle East. Father Knapp, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Hello.
It's wonderful to have you with us. You've written a book called The Last Christians. Why the title The Last Christians? What is this really focusing on?
Yes. So I discovered with the refugees, which are now my neighbors, that they were coming from the origin of Christianity. There are still existing some communities which still speak the language of Jesus, which was Aramaic. And they use this Aramaic as their ordinary language and also as the liturgical language. And if you ask them, so they can tell you that their ancestors, they were just for nearby 2,000 years Christians. So we have here the people from the origin of Christianity. And just these Christians are persecuted, and they have to exile. They have to go to Europe or to Canada or to USA or to Australia. And so in the homeland of Christianity, which is the Middle East, the last Christians are leaving because they are persecuted, because they have no chance for living there. There is a very old discrimination. And in the last 3 years, there was a lot of cruel persecution through ISIS. Some of them were killed. They had to leave all their goods. They were thrown out of their villages, their cities. They couldn't stay any longer in their houses. And so now they are arriving here. The last Christians would mean these are the last Christians of the original Christianity.
You know, so as we look at that Fertile Crescent, as we look at the birth of humanity, we go back to Aramaic, which was the language of the Babylonians prior to that, of course, and we see that transition in the book of Daniel, as Daniel goes from a young man taken into captivity, writes part of the book of Daniel in Aramaic, part of it in Hebrew, and we begin to see now the Aramaic language taking over. Same alphabet as the Hebrew alphabet. If you can speak Hebrew, you can understand Aramaic, and if you can speak Aramaic, you can understand Hebrew. The divide seems so large that it's almost as if we have two people standing at the top of the world with their backs to each other, but if they just shifted their position, they would see that they are much closer together than they really thought that they were. So we have a responsibility to educate and to inform and to minister. But this is also a precursor to what the Bible tells us is going to happen in the Middle East as Iran, Russia, Turkey, the Shiite Islamic regime gathers together, Ezekiel 38 and 39, this unholy trinity, if you will, forming and persecuting all Jews and Christians, and that persecution is being played out through groups like Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, Boko Haram, Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, so many names, so many factions of a prophecy about Ishmael, that Ishmael would be a wild donkey among men, and all the nations of the world would war against him, and he would war against his brothers. You live in the midst of that prophecy of the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Esau coming together in a community in Leipzig, Germany, and seeing the remnant of biblical history come to play right in front of your very eyes. It must be a man of the cloth, a man of the Word of God, wanting to be close to Bethlehem, the house of bread, to be there to have God to have answered your prayer and brought Nazareth to you.
That's true. Because now I was very astonished about them when they arrived, because I didn't know a lot about the Christians in the Middle East and the Oriental churches. And when they arrived here, for me, it opened my eyes to understand better what is happening. Also the prophecies, which is a prophecy that there will be always a struggle between the different nations, and we have to wait for a new world. God will create a new world, but we have always to look for a solidarity with the victims. And I understand my place here in Leipzig to be on the side of the victims of violence. The violence is a human problem since Cain and Abel, since the beginning of humanity. But what we learn from Jesus is that God is not on the side of the governors and of the strong people, but it's on the side of the victims. And so to look for God, that means for me now to be nearby to the people who arrive here as spoiled people, as persecuted people who lost all, and I can live a solidarity with them.
If you would take a moment, you have several very, very moving stories about connections with Sister Salamas, with some other folks in the community that you've been able to connect to. Share with us, if you will, a glimpse of their story and things you heard that you had never heard before, coming from the mouths of those who were persecuted, making this something that became real to you and became a mission field for you, because you wrote the book to identify, to take out from under the cover of darkness this persecution, so that we who read it would be compelled to do something about it. It's a call to action.
Yes. When I went to my new neighbors and we spoke to each other, they told me their stories. And I was very touched by these stories. And for me, it was like a mission. These stories haven't to be forgotten. Too often we forgot the stories of the persecuted Christians. In the Middle East, they have a long story of discrimination, but we never saw that. And I think it's very important for somebody to be seen also with his pain and with his difficulties. We forgot them. And it opened my eyes now, so I want to share this experience with other people. Therefore, I wrote down the stories. And when I ask my neighbors about their history, they tell me, yes, that's not only our history of today, also our fathers and grandfathers, they were persecuted. There is a long story of persecution, discrimination, and even genocides of the Christian people there. And they tell me also the story, 100 years ago, my grandfather's family, all they were just killed. And now, 100 years later, the same story is repeated. And I say, why it is repeated? Because we weren't aware of this story. We forgot what happened 100 years ago, and we didn't see the problems. And therefore, the things could be the story repeated, and we have to stop this story. And we can only stop the story of discrimination if we remember what is happening and what was happening, and if we speak to each other, if we share this experience, then we can help to create a better future.
Now, did you visit the Middle East?
Yes, I was sometimes in the Middle East just 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Once I went by bicycle from Germany to Jerusalem. So I went through Syria to Turkey to Jordan by bicycle. And so you learn a lot of people, because if you go by aeroplane or by car, you don't meet the people on the roads. And I like the Middle East, and I had always contacts. But lately, I was in Iraq 2 years ago. I accompanied a friend, a neighbor from here, whose father died, and I could go with him to the north of Iraq, nearby Mosul. It's Ankawa. Ankawa is a village or a small city nearby to Arbil, which is the capital of the autonomous region of Kurdistan in the northern of Iraq. And I was very touched there to see all these refugee camps. Hundreds of thousands of people are still living in tents or in containers in the desert. There is no tree, nothing, only these tents. And when I saw all the children there, they have no school, they have no future, they are not prepared for a future. I was really sad that they are forgotten. ISIS threw them out, and the conflicts between Shiite and Sunnite soldiers and parties and movements in Iraq, they are fighting each against the other. But every time they create new refugees. And the Christians or the Yazid people, they have nobody who is interested in them. So they are forgotten, and they are living in these very large refugee camps. I was very touched seeing that.
You know, in these experiences, you saw firsthand the living conditions. Did you bear witness to any of the persecution or just the aftermath of the persecution?
Yes, they told me their stories, and I understood that in one night 100,000 Christians had to leave their homes by feet. When ISIS arrived in the Christian city of Karakosh, they told them, you can convert to Islam, then you can remain and you can keep your houses and your jobs and you live like you ever lived. But if you want to remain Christians, you have to leave all your goods and to go by feet only with the clothes to Kurdistan. And all the Christians decided, yes, we leave our home country where our fathers and grandfathers for centuries lived. We leave our houses and we prefer to live now in a refugee camp without future. One bishop told me they lost all, but they didn't lose their faith. So I heard these stories of a real persecution, and a lot of them had to see that somebody of their family is killed, or somebody is taken to pay a ransom to ISIS or to Al-Qaeda, but they remained faithful to their Christian tradition. And I was really touched by that.
Since you visited Iraq, you've now come back home. You're in the process of moving from the flat that you live in to another flat, but same neighborhood, same community. Are you finding that as you relate to the Muslim community that they are becoming more accepting of Jesus? Are they finding are you finding it to be evangelical, fruitful, an evangelical harvest, that people are wanting to know Jesus because they come from, some of them, of course, are persecuted Christians, but you have a large Muslim population you're ministering to as well. And even from the short time that I've known you, I can tell that you treat one no different than the other, that they are both human beings and worthy of dignity and respect. But if you found it an opportunity to share the gospel.
Yes, first I want to say that it's very important to accept all refugees, because the message of Jesus is you have to help people in difficulty and not asking them, are you Catholic, are you Protestant, are you Muslim, are you Hindu? Every human being who is in difficulty is our brother and our sister. But this is just what the Muslims here discover, because they see that a lot of Christian peoples help them. They share with them their goods, they invite them, they help them to learn German, they help them to find a flat. And so they see the Christians, they don't distinguish between Christian and Muslims, because Christianity, this is a universal love to every human being. And so they discover also a very important point of the Christian message, which is a little bit different of the Muslim message, because there is always a distinction between the Muslims, which are the true believers, and then there are the brothers, but only of a secondary quality. These are the Jewish and the Christian people. And so they see Christians have another kind of seeing us. They don't see us as a secondary quality, but they accept us at the same level. And this is a message of the universal love of God, which Jesus brought to humanity. And then they are also interested, some of them, to know Jesus. Oh, in prison, there are some Muslim people who asked me Injil. Injil is the gospel in Arabic. So I bought some Arabic gospels and I brought them to the prison, and they are discovering the person of Jesus, but in a different way than they learned about Jesus before, because in Quran they know Isa, Jesus, but it's not the Jesus of the gospel. There are some similarities, but there are also big differences. So they are interested now to know Jesus also from the original sources, from the original texts. And I see that there are a lot of Muslims are open to learn more about Christianity. But the most important for me is that they see that the Christian practice is different. It's not only speaking, it's what we are doing, our comportment against them, how we treat them, how we accept them, how we go to encounter them. That is important, that we accept them as real brothers and sisters, because this is the center of the message of Jesus.
Well, there's no question. And I think that in America, we have been very faithful to the great omission, not the great commission. We have omitted the Jews and the Muslims from preaching the gospel because it's difficult. We don't understand, I think the average American doesn't understand Islam at all. They only go by what the media tells them. They have not taken the time to read or study, and so they take a look and they forget that they're human beings. Yes, there are those who are vocal, but the average ordinary family is the same average ordinary family with the same needs, with the same crying children, with the same hungry children. They catch colds, they catch the flu, they have problems finding jobs, they need help finding shelter. They're human beings, and their belief system, 99% of people believe what they were raised to believe. You go to school, you learn how to add 2 + 2 = 4. You become a reflection of what you've been taught. And so these are not people who are making the decision to accept Islam over Christianity. They've only grown up in an environment, been raised in an environment where Islam is the religion of the country they come from. So now you're giving them the opportunity to see Christianity at work and see that there might be, for them, a better way. the consequence, does the consequence follow them? Are you finding that in these refugee centers or flats in Leipzig where there's a mixture of Christians and Muslims, is there any of the outward pressure that if a Muslim does come to faith in Christianity, are they seeing the same persecution that they saw back in the Middle East?
There are also difficulties. We have to see that and to be aware that it's not so easy, because if Muslim people who learn for years and years that Christians are not good people, they have a wrong faith, they are eating impure meals, and so they bring this tradition with them, and we have to be patient that they can learn that there is a difference, that they will not have their judgments about Christians which they learned. They have to learn now that Christians are different, and that they can leave their prejudgments which they have from before, and they can accept a new way of being together. So there are difficulties, because a lot of coming from nations where they learned to a certain discrimination against the Christians, which is very deep rooted. But at the same time, I see also that there are some Muslims which are really interested in Christian faith. Some of them are asking for being baptized here in Leipzig. There are some Muslim people who are now going to Christian celebrations. So this strong and very narrow seeing Christianity is opened by the real contacts.
Well, it's very, very encouraging to hear what's going on. Certainly, 900 on average, 900,000 Christians are losing their lives at the hands of Muslims throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa, and there is persecution. You have done an amazing job of helping to create an environment there in Leipzig which is welcoming and gospel-friendly to be able to be the hands and feet of Jesus. You share the stories of the last Christians in a book of persecution, flight, and resilience in the Middle East, your personal experiences, what's going on, and we all need to be aware of the plight of Christians throughout the world. Just because it hasn't happened here yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. You've seen it firsthand. You know that there is a wave coming and that the agenda is to advance. The agenda is to expand. It is not to shrink back. So, Andreas Knapp, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth and sharing with us the last Christians' stories of persecution, flight, and resilience in the Middle East. May God bless all the works of your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you very much, and have a good time.
Thank you. Shalom. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.